To the rest of the world, Kang De Hyun was a tragedy wrapped in billions of dollars. 2 years ago, a catastrophic car crash had supposedly left the ruthless corporate titan blind, wheelchair-bound, and horribly scarred. Society whispered that he had become a monster, a bitter recluse hiding in his sprawling estate, entirely incapable of securing a wife or producing an heir. But behind the locked doors of his private study, there was no wheelchair. De Hyun stood tall by the floor-to-ceiling windows, staring out at the Seoul skyline. His sharp, aristocratic jawline caught the dim light, and his thick, jet-black hair fell in a perfectly messy disarray, framing a face untouched by any permanent ruin. His dark eyes were sharp, calculating, and very much capable of sight. He was playing a dangerous game. By feigning weakness, he was drawing out the rats who had orchestrated his accident. Among those rats were the Damian family, a desperate, greedy lineage aiming to swallow his empire by marrying off their daughter, Catherine, to the cripple. De Hyun had agreed to the arrangement only to keep his enemies close. He despised the Damians, and he fully intended to make Catherine's life a living hell. Miles away, in the opulent and cold Damian manor, Dora was already living in hell. Dora was a striking beauty, a young black woman with charismatic, expressive features and incredibly long, thick wavy hair that flowed in a dark cascade down her spine. But in the Damian household, she was nothing more than a maid. For 3 years, she had polished their floors and served their meals, enduring their subtle cruelties for one reason: her mother. Her mother lay in a hospital bed on life support, her mounting medical bills completely controlled by the patriarch, Arthur Damian. "You should be grateful, Dora," Arthur sneered, stepping into the servants' quarters. Beside him stood his daughter, Catherine, who looked absolutely disgusted. "I won't do it, father," Catherine snapped, inspecting her manicured nails. "I am not marrying a blind, crippled monster. I'd rather die than push his wheelchair around that depressing mansion." Arthur silenced her with a look, then turned his cold eyes to Dora. "Catherine will not be attending the wedding today." "You will." Dora dropped the dust cloth, her heart plummeting. "Sir? I can't. That's fraud. It's illegal." "What's illegal is what will happen to your mother's life support if you refuse," Arthur said smoothly. "Put on the veil. Say I do. If he is as blind and broken as they say, he won't know the difference until the ink is dry. Play the part of my daughter, secure the marriage alliance, and I will pay for your mother's treatments indefinitely. Refuse, and I will make the call to the hospital right now." Tears stung Dora's eyes, but she swallowed her pride. She had no choice. She nodded, sacrificing her own future to save the only family she had left. The wedding was a bleak, joyless affair, stripped of the usual high society fanfare. It was a transaction, pure and simple. Dora stood at the altar, suffocating beneath layers of heavy, white silk. A thick, opaque veil was pinned over her face, obscuring her charismatic features and hiding the tears that silently tracked down her cheeks. Her long, wavy hair was pinned up uncomfortably, hidden away to match the silhouette of the woman she was supposed to be. Beside her sat Kang De Hyun. Even slumped in the high-tech wheelchair, wearing dark sunglasses and gripping a white cane, his presence was incredibly intimidating. He radiated a dark, freezing energy. Dora felt a shiver run down her spine as the priest droned on. De Hyun, meanwhile, felt nothing but rising disgust. He could smell the expensive, cloying perfume Arthur Damian had likely doused his daughter in. He sat perfectly still, his muscles tense under his tailored tuxedo, acting the part of the broken man. So, the spoiled princess actually showed up, he thought bitterly. She's willing to marry a monster just to get her hands on my wealth. "Do you, Catherine Damian, take Kang De Hyun?" Dora's voice trembled when it was her turn to speak. "I do." It was a whisper, barely audible, choked with fear. De Hyun frowned slightly beneath his dark glasses. The voice was softer, richer than he expected from the loud, materialistic Catherine he had investigated. But he dismissed the thought. Greed could make a woman act demure. When the ceremony concluded, there was no kiss. Arthur Damian quickly signed the marriage registry on his daughter's behalf, citing her overwhelming nerves, and practically shoved Dora toward De Hyun's towering bodyguard. "Take care of my precious girl, Mr. Kang," Arthur said, his voice dripping with false warmth. De Hyun didn't speak. He simply tapped his cane twice, signaling his bodyguard to wheel him away. Dora trailed behind them like a prisoner marching to the gallows, stepping into the sleek black car that would take her away from everything she knew. The master bedroom of De Hyun's estate was vast, cast in shadows, and terrifyingly quiet. The heavy oak doors clicked shut behind them, leaving Dora entirely alone with the man society called a monster. De Hyun sat in his wheelchair near the center of the room. "Take off the veil," he ordered. His voice was a deep, gravelly baritone that sent a shockwave through Dora's chest. It wasn't the weak, trembling voice of a broken man, it was a command from a king. Dora's hand shook as she reached up, fumbling with the heavy pins. She let the veil fall to the floor. As she did, the pins holding her hair gave way. Her incredibly long, dark wavy hair tumbled down her back, spilling along her spine in a beautiful, wild cascade. De Hyun, assuming he was entirely alone with the woman he intended to destroy, reached up and pulled off his dark glasses. He blinked against the dim light, preparing to glare at Damian. Instead, his sharp eyes locked onto Dora. He froze. The woman standing before him was not the pale, sharp-featured Catherine. She was a breathtaking black woman with warm, terrified eyes, flawless skin, and an ethereal, quiet strength about her. De Hyun's mind raced. He didn't need to act blind in this moment, because he was genuinely blinded by the shock of the betrayal. The Damians hadn't just plotted to steal his money, they had insulted his intelligence by sending a decoy. Slowly, deliberately, De Hyun stood up from the wheelchair. Dora gasped, stumbling backward against the heavy mahogany door. You can stand? You can see?" De Hyun closed the distance between them in 3 long, predatory strides. His messy hair shadowed his furious eyes, and his sharp jawline clenched so hard a muscle feathered in his cheek. He looked down at her, his towering frame practically swallowing her in the shadows. "Who the hell are you?" he demanded, his voice a lethal hiss. My name is Dora," she stammered, her back pressed flat against the wood. I work for them." "A maid?" De Hyun laughed, but the sound was entirely devoid of humor. It was a dark, chilling sound. "Arthur Damian thinks so little of me that he sent the hired help to claim my empire?" "No, it's not like that," Dora pleaded, looking up into his furious eyes. "I didn't want this. I was forced." "Save your breath," De Hyun interrupted, grabbing her chin with a firm, unyielding grip. He didn't hurt her, but his touch was a warning. He looked at her beautiful, charismatic face and saw nothing but a scheming pawn. "You agreed to put on that dress. You stood at the altar and lied to my face. You thought you could come into my home, play the tragic bride to a crippled man, and walk away rich. I don't want your money." Dora cried out, a tear finally spilling over her lashes. "My mother is sick. He was going to kill her." De Hyun released her chin in disgust, stepping back. He had spent 2 years surrounded by liars, assassins, and thieves. He trusted no one, least of all a woman sent by the Damians. A sick mother. A classic, pathetic excuse, he sneered, looking her up and down with absolute contempt. "You made a grave mistake agreeing to this alliance, Dora. You thought you were marrying a helpless, blind cripple." He leaned in closer, his sharp features illuminated by the moonlight cutting through the window. "But you just married the devil. And I am going to make you regret the day you ever heard the name Kang De Hyun." The harsh fluorescent lights of the ICU cast a pale glow over Dora's face as she stood by her mother's bedside. With the massive, inexplicable wire transfer she had received the night before, she had just paid off the hospital's mounting debts in full. She squeezed her mother's frail, sleeping hand, a single tear slipping down her cheek. She had survived the devil's den, and her mother would live to see another day. What Dora didn't know was that she wasn't alone. Standing in the shadows of the hospital corridor, Adam watched her every move. De Hyun had given his assistant strict orders to shadow his substitute wife after her abrupt departure from the club. An hour later, Adam stood in the center of De Hyun's private study back at the estate. De Hyun sat at his massive mahogany desk, tapping his fingers impatiently. "Well?" De Hyun demanded. "Sir, she wasn't lying," Adam said quietly, handing over a thick manila folder. "Her mother is in a comatose state, entirely dependent on life support. The Damians were paying for it, but Arthur Damian cut the funding yesterday. Furthermore, I looked into the marriage arrangement. Dora was heavily blackmailed. Arthur threatened to pull the plug on her mother if she didn't take Catherine's place under the veil. She had absolutely no desire for your wealth, sir. She was just trying to keep her only family alive." De Hyun stared at the file, the blood draining from his face. For a man who prided himself on his razor-sharp perception, he had been a fool. He had spent the last week acting physically blind, but in reality, he had been entirely blinded by his own arrogance and prejudice. He had locked her on a cold floor. He had treated her like a greedy parasite. He had forced her onto a nightclub stage out of sheer desperation. A wave of intense, suffocating self-loathing washed over him. He gripped the edge of his desk so hard his knuckles turned white. He was the monster society painted him to be, not because of his scars, but because of what he had done to an innocent woman. Apologies were a foreign concept to Kang De Hyun. In the cutthroat world of corporate warfare, saying sorry was a sign of weakness. But as he sat in his study, replaying the memory of Dora's terrified, tear-streaked face at the club, a heavy knot of guilt twisted in his chest. "Adam," De Hyun cleared his throat, staring rigidly out the window. "How does one rectify a gross misjudgment with a woman?" Adam blinked, thoroughly surprised by the question. He hid a small smile. "Well, sir. In my experience, flowers have a unique way of making a lady's heart melt. Actions also speak louder than words." De Hyun didn't say a word, but he immediately set to work. The next morning, Dora awoke in her isolated, dim room to find 3 men in sharp suits packing her few belongings. Panic flared, thinking she was being thrown out, until the head butler bowed deeply. "Madam, the master has ordered your things moved to the master suite." Confused and wary, Dora followed them. When she entered De Hyun's massive, sunlit bedroom, her breath hitched. Sitting on the center of the nightstand was a breathtaking bouquet of rare white orchids. But the biggest shock came an hour later. The head doctor from the prestigious Kang Medical Center called her personally. Her mother was being transferred via private ambulance to their VIP wing, under the direct care of the country's top specialists, all fully funded by De Hyun's private estate. De Hyun's attitude shifted entirely. The icy glare stopped. The cruel demands vanished. Instead of a freezing tyrant, he was quietly observant, protective, and startlingly gentle. Flowers arrived every single morning, roses, lilies, tulips, filling the master suite with life. Dora could feel the shift in the air, a warming tide that left her both relieved and deeply confused. Despite the luxurious new treatment, Dora forced herself to keep her guard up. "Do not fall for him," she chanted in her mind daily. "You are just a substitute." Legally, Catherine Damian's name was on the marriage certificate. Catherine was his rightful wife in the eyes of the law, a materialistic woman who had no idea that the crippled monster she had rejected was actually a ridiculously handsome, powerful billionaire in peak physical condition. Dora knew she was treading on borrowed time. One evening, after a long day of visiting her mother at the new, state-of-the-art facility, Dora took a long, hot shower in the master ensuite. The warm water washed away her exhaustion. Wrapping a plush white towel securely around her breathtaking curves, she opened the bathroom door, a cloud of fragrant steam trailing out behind her. She stopped dead in her tracks. De Hyun was sitting in his wheelchair near the foot of the bed. He had taken off his dark glasses. As Dora stepped out, his dark, sharp eyes locked onto hers, traveling slowly down the length of her bare legs, taking in the damp, extremely long wavy hair clinging to her collarbones. He didn't look away. In fact, he began to stare at her with an intensity that made the air in the room suddenly feel heavy and dangerously thin. An electric shock jolted through Dora's entire body. Her skin flushed hot under his burning gaze. She instinctively clutched the towel tighter against her chest, her heart hammering against her ribs like a trapped bird. "You're back," De Hyun murmured. His deep, gravelly voice sent another shiver down her spine. Yes," Dora stammered, unable to break eye contact. He didn't say he was sorry. He didn't have to. The raw, possessive hunger in his eyes, mixed with a newly found tenderness, spoke volumes. But as De Hyun slowly gripped the arms of his wheelchair, looking as though he might stand up right then and there, Dora took a panicked step back. She was living a dangerous lie in this master bedroom. And falling in love with the devil was a fatal mistake she could not afford to make. Dora's worst fear, and deepest unspoken fantasy, became reality in the blink of an eye. De Hyun's knuckles turned white as he gripped the armrests of his wheelchair. Slowly, fluidly, and with the grace of a dormant predator finally waking, he stood up. He was terrifyingly tall, his broad shoulders blocking out the dim light of the room. Without the chair diminishing his presence, the sheer power radiating from him was overwhelming. He didn't reach for his cane. He didn't stumble. He closed the distance between them in 3 deliberate, predatory strides until there was barely an inch of space left between his chest and hers. Dora was frozen, her heart hammering wildly against her ribs. She looked up into his dark, intense eyes. His messy black hair fell effortlessly across his forehead, framing a face so flawlessly handsome it made her breath hitch. He leaned in close, his sharp jawline brushing against her damp cheek. His breath was warm against her ear. "I am sorry," he whispered. The words were rough, pulled from a throat completely unused to the concept of apologizing. The raw vulnerability in his tone terrified her more than his anger ever had. Panic flared in her chest. She was just the substitute, a pawn playing a dangerous game. She couldn't let herself drown in him. I have to go," Dora stammered, instinctively trying to create distance between them. She took a hasty step backward, but her bare foot caught the edge of the plush bath mat. With a gasp, she lost her balance, bracing herself for the harsh impact of the floor. But she never hit the ground. De Hyun's arm wrapped around her waist with lightning speed, catching her effortlessly. He pulled her flush against his hard chest, holding her securely as her hands instinctively grasped his shoulders. "Wifey, do not dare to stay away from me," he murmured, his voice a low, vibrating hum that sent shockwaves through her core. "You are my wife." Dora's eyes widened, her chest heaving as she stared up at him. But I..." she stammered, her voice trembling. "I am not the one on the marriage certificate." De Hyun's lips curved into a wicked, breathtaking smirk. He tilted his head, his dark eyes sparkling with a dangerous mix of amusement and desire. "So you care about the title?" he asked softly, his gaze dropping to her lips. Dora De Hyun. The sound of her name attached to him made her heart perform a wild acrobatics routine. She was entirely disarmed by his words, her previous fears melting into a puddle of shock and undeniable attraction. Before she could form a coherent sentence, De Hyun swept her up into his arms, carrying her easily across the room and gently placing her onto the massive, plush mattress. Suddenly hyper-aware that she was wearing nothing but a towel, Dora's cheeks burned crimson. She immediately grabbed the thick black silk blanket, pulling it up to her chin to cover herself, her dark eyes darting away in absolute shyness. De Hyun chuckled, a deep, rich sound she had never heard before, and sat on the edge of the bed beside her. That night, the heavy, imposing walls of the Kang estate finally felt like a home. De Hyun didn't push her boundaries. Instead, he laid down beside her, fully clothed, bridging the emotional chasm that had separated them since the wedding day. Surrounded by the scent of the white orchids he had bought her, they finally talked. He told her about the accident 2 years ago. His voice grew quiet as he explained the sabotage, how his brakes were cut by a trusted family member aiming to steal his empire. He described the wreckage, the blood, and the agonizing realization that the only way to survive and find the true culprits was to play dead. To become the crippled monster society expected him to be. Dora listened, her heart breaking for the isolated, betrayed man hiding beneath the billionaire facade. Slowly, her hand emerged from beneath the blanket. She reached out, her fingers gently brushing away the messy hair from his forehead, tracing the flawless skin that was supposedly scarred. "You don't have to be a monster anymore," she whispered. De Hyun looked at her, his eyes softening entirely. He pulled her gently into his chest, burying his face in her incredibly long, thick wavy hair. All the differences, the anger, and the misunderstandings dissolved in the quiet darkness of the room. They fell asleep tangled together, wrapped in a blanket of profound, undeniable peace. The next morning, the golden sunlight spilled across the bed. Dora woke up first. Smiling softly at De Hyun's sleeping face, she tried to slowly, silently sneak out of the bed to get dressed. She barely made it to the edge of the mattress before a strong hand clamped around her wrist. With a yelp of surprise, she was yanked backward, tumbling right back onto the pillows. De Hyun rolled over, pinning her playfully beneath him. His morning voice was impossibly deep and raspy. "Where do you think you're going?" he murmured, pressing a soft, lingering kiss to her jawline. To make you breakfast," she lied breathlessly. De Hyun chuckled, trailing kisses down the crook of her neck, sending jolts of electricity straight through her veins. "Stay," he commanded softly. And she did. Over the next month, the Kang estate transformed. Dora served as the lady of the house with a deep, radiant love, and De Hyun cherished her in return. He spoiled her ruthlessly, ensuring her mother received the best care in the world, and protected Dora as if she were his most prized treasure. For a brief, beautiful window in time, they were blissfully happy. But a secret as large as Kang De Hyun could never stay buried forever. It started with a leaked photograph. A paparazzi drone managed to capture a blurry image through the estate windows of a tall, imposing man standing by the glass, holding a beautiful black woman with extremely long, wavy hair in his arms. The internet exploded with rumors, but it was Damian who put the pieces together. In the opulent Damian manner, Damian stared at the tablet in her father's hands, her perfectly manicured nails biting into her palms. The man in the photo wasn't in a wheelchair. And according to her father's newly acquired medical contacts, Kang De Hyun was in perfect physical condition, and richer than he had ever been. He was breathtakingly handsome. He was a god among men. And he was legally hers. "That little rat," Catherine hissed, her face contorting with ugly, materialistic jealousy as she stared at the silhouette of Dora in the photo. "She stole my husband. She stole my life." The next afternoon, the heavy oak doors of the Kang estate flew open. Dora was sitting in the grand foyer, laughing with Adam as she arranged a fresh vase of orchids, when the sound of high heels echoed sharply against the marble floor. She turned to see Damian marching into the hall, flanked by her father's bodyguards. Catherine wore a designer suit, her eyes flashing with venomous entitlement as she looked Dora up and down. "Get your things and get out of my house, you pathetic maid," Catherine demanded, her voice echoing shrilly off the walls. She pulled a crisp piece of paper from her designer bag and slammed it onto the foyer table. "I am Catherine Kang. And I have come to claim my rightful husband." The grand foyer of the Kang estate fell dead silent as the heavy footsteps of Kang De Hyun echoed down the grand staircase. Dora turned, her heart leaping with a desperate hope. She expected him to banish Catherine. She expected the man who had held her the night before, who had kissed her scars and promised her safety, to stand by her side. But as De Hyun reached the bottom of the stairs, his face was an impenetrable mask of ice. His sharp jawline was set in stone, and his dark eyes, half hidden by his messy black hair, looked at Dora with chilling indifference. "De Hyun," Dora whispered, taking a step toward him. He didn't look at her. He turned his gaze entirely to Catherine. "Catherine," his deep voice resonated through the hall, devoid of any warmth. "You are late claiming your rightful place." Dora stopped breathing. The floor felt as though it were crumbling beneath her feet. "I apologize, darling," Catherine purred, stepping forward to loop her arm through his. She shot a venomous glare at Dora. I had to deal with the shock of this stray dog parading around in my name. Get her out, De Hyun said coldly, addressing Adam, who stood frozen in shock. The past month was merely an entertaining diversion. Now the true lady of the house has arrived. Have her pack her things and leave immediately. She is nothing to me. Dora's world shattered into a million jagged pieces. An entertaining diversion. The words tore through her chest like a physical blade. She didn't fight back. She didn't scream. The devastating betrayal robbed her of her voice. She didn't care about his billions or his empire, she had given this cold billionaire her whole heart. Within the hour, Dora was cast out into the biting wind with nothing but a small suitcase, entirely discarded, as if the beautiful nights they had shared had never happened at all. The atmosphere inside the Kang estate master suite was suffocating. Catherine was busy redecorating the West Wing, completely oblivious to the fact that her new husband was using her as a ladder to execute his ultimate revenge. Adam stood in the center of De Hyun's dim private study. I went to check on her, sir, Adam reported, his voice tight with suppressed emotion. She rented a small, run-down room on the edge of the city. She wouldn't take the extra money I tried to offer. Sir, she is devastated. I have never seen a woman look so utterly broken. She is terrified, completely hollowed out by your betrayal. De Hyun stood with his back to his assistant, staring out the floor-to-ceiling windows into the dark night. He held a crystal glass of red wine in his hand, his knuckles turning white. The image of Dora's terrified, tear-filled eyes flashed in his mind. The woman with the beautiful, charismatic features and the incredibly long wavy hair that he loved to tangle his fingers in, he had thrown her to the wolves to maintain his cover. With a sudden, guttural scream of pure agony, De Hyun hurled the crystal glass across the room. It slammed into the stone fireplace, shattering into 1,000 pieces, dark red wine bleeding down the brick like a fresh wound. He dropped his head, his hands gripping the edge of his desk as he gasped for air. Every second he spent pretending to tolerate Catherine was pushing him closer to finding the final, missing link to the real culprit behind his accident 2 years ago. Damian held the files, and Catherine's presence in his house was the only way to bypass their security. Hold on, my Dora, De Hyun murmured, his voice cracking with a desperate, agonizing pain. Just hold on a little longer. A week later, Dora sat alone at a small, rusted table outside a street corner cafe. She stared blankly at a cup of black coffee she couldn't afford to drink, her once radiant face pale and drawn. Across the street, parked discreetly in a heavily tinted black SUV, De Hyun watched her. He had been secretly following her for days, unable to stay away, tortured by the sight of the pain he had caused her. Suddenly, a sleek white sports car pulled up to the curb. Damian stepped out, weighed down by shopping bags from high-end boutiques, her nose wrinkled in disgust at the neighborhood. As she walked toward her driver, she spotted Dora. A cruel smile stretched across Catherine's face. She detoured, marching straight up to the cafe table. Well, if it isn't the little maid, Catherine sneered loudly, drawing the attention of passers-by. Look at you. Back in the gutters where you belong. Did you really think my husband would ever love a pathetic, penniless substitute over me? Dora didn't look up. The exhaustion in her bones was too heavy. She simply kept her eyes on her coffee, choosing to ignore the venomous woman entirely. Catherine's face flushed red with indignation at being ignored. Look at me when I speak to you, she shrieked. Smack. Catherine's hand swung out, slapping Dora across the face with such force that Dora's head snapped to the side. A sharp gasp echoed from the onlookers. Dora slowly touched her stinging cheek, her long wavy hair falling forward to hide the fresh tears spilling from her eyes. Across the street, inside the SUV, De Hyun saw red. His sharp jawline locked into a lethal, terrifying scowl. His blood boiled, a dark, murderous vengeance peeking inside his chest. He reached for the door handle, ready to tear Damian apart with his bare hands. Right at that exact second, his phone vibrated in his pocket. It was Adam. De Hyun answered it, his eyes never leaving Dora. Sir, Adam's voice was breathless, triumphant. We have it. Every single encrypted file. The audio recordings, the bank transfers. We have the absolute proof that Arthur and Catherine Damian orchestrated your accident. We have enough evidence to put them both behind bars for the rest of their miserable lives. A dark, dangerous smirk crossed De Hyun's face. The waiting game was finally over. Send it to the authorities, and freeze every single Damian asset, De Hyun ordered, his voice cold as the grave. Now. He threw the phone onto the passenger seat and shoved the car door open. He didn't care about his cover anymore. He didn't care who saw him walk. All he cared about was the beautiful woman weeping at the corner cafe. It was time to get his wife back. The sharp echo of Catherine's slap had barely faded into the street noise when the atmosphere shifted. The air grew impossibly heavy, suffocating the murmuring onlookers. Catherine raised her chin, a triumphant sneer twisting her features as she looked down at Dora. But her smug victory lasted only a fraction of a second. A towering shadow fell over the small, rusted cafe table. Catherine turned around, her face draining of all color. Standing there was Kang De Hyun. He stood at his full, terrifying height, his broad shoulders blocking the sun. His messy black hair framed a face of absolute, murderous fury, his sharp jawline clenched so tight it looked carved from granite. He was not a broken cripple, he was a god of vengeance. De Hyun? Catherine stammered, stumbling backward in her designer heels, her eyes wide with sheer terror at the realization that he could see, he could walk, and he was looking at her like an insect he was about to crush. Catherine Damian, De Hyun's voice was a low, lethal vibration that made the surrounding crowd step back. As of 3 minutes ago, your family's assets have been completely frozen. The authorities are currently raiding your father's estate. We have the audio recordings, the bank transfers, and the physical evidence proving you and Arthur orchestrated the tampering of my brakes 2 years ago. Catherine's jaw dropped, her designer bag slipping from her trembling hands to the dirty pavement. No, that's impossible. You are bankrupt. And you are going to prison for a very, very long time, De Hyun interrupted, his dark eyes freezing her in place. Get out of my sight before I kill you myself. Catherine let out a pathetic, strangled sob as the distant sound of police sirens began to echo through the city streets. She turned and ran, abandoning her bags and her pride, entirely shattered into pieces. With the threat eradicated, De Hyun's terrifying demeanor vanished. He turned to Dora, his eyes instantly melting into an ocean of immense pain and sadness. He saw the red handprint blooming on her beautiful cheek. Dora, he whispered, reaching out with a trembling hand to cup her face. Smack. Dora struck his hand away with a fierce, explosive energy. She stood up, her incredibly long wavy hair whipping around her shoulders. Her charismatic eyes, usually so warm and gentle, were blazing with a devastated fury. Don't touch me, she choked out, her voice trembling with the weight of her broken heart. Please, let me explain, De Hyun pleaded, taking a step forward. I had to protect the investigation. I had to let her in to get the final proof. And I had to be thrown out like garbage. Dora screamed, the raw agony in her voice silencing the entire street. Tears poured down her face. Where was this defense when you dragged me out of your house? Where were you when I was standing in your foyer, completely humiliated, watching you look at me like I meant absolutely nothing to you? I did it to keep you safe from them, he begged, the powerful billionaire utterly reduced to a desperate man. No, you did it because you only trust yourself, Dora cried, stepping backward, shaking her head. You threw me back to the wolves without a second thought. You didn't give me a choice. I gave you my whole heart, De Hyun, and you crushed it. Dora, please. I don't want your money. I don't want your protection. And I don't want you, she lied, the words tasting like ash in her mouth. She turned on her heel and walked away, disappearing into the crowded city streets. De Hyun stood frozen in the center of the pavement. The bustling city moved around him, but he couldn't breathe. A suffocating, crushing loneliness collapsed on his chest. He had won his empire back, but he had lost his entire world. 2 weeks passed, and the Kang estate felt like a mausoleum. De Hyun sat in his massive glass corner office in downtown Seoul, staring blankly at a multi-billion-dollar merger contract. He couldn't concentrate. The letters blurred together. He hadn't slept a full night since the day Dora walked away. He was drowning in her denial. He had tried everything his vast wealth could buy. He had sent fleets of luxury cars to her tiny apartment. He had bought the building she lived in to ensure her safety. He had ordered the hospital to upgrade her mother to the presidential suite. But every grand gesture was met with absolute, deafening silence. She refused to see him. She returned every gift. Dora was the only person who had ever seen the real De Hyun. She was the one who traced the phantom scars on his soul and told him he didn't have to be a monster. Without her, the victory over the Damians tasted like poison. A simple bouquet of orchids wouldn't work this time. He hadn't just made a mistake, he had broken her profound trust. Across the city, Dora was failing just as miserably. She sat in her small, cramped room, clutching a pillow to her chest as the rain beat against the window. No matter how fiercely she tried to scrub De Hyun from her memory, she couldn't. She remembered the way his sharp jawline felt under her fingertips, the deep rumble of his voice calling her wifey, the protective warmth of his arms. She had tried to move on. She had applied for new jobs, spent hours reading to her unconscious mother, and forced herself to walk through the parks they used to drive past. But every tall shadow made her heart leap. Every deep voice made her turn around. She hated him for breaking her heart, but God, she still loved him from the very bottom of it. "Sir, with all due respect, your current strategy is abysmal," Adam said smoothly, standing before De Hyun's massive desk. De Hyun glared at his assistant, his messy hair falling into his bloodshot eyes. "I bought her entire neighborhood, Adam. I ensured she will never pay a dime for rent again." "And that, sir, is exactly the problem," Adam sighed, adjusting his glasses. "You are acting like a billionaire throwing money at a broken contract. Miss Dora does not care about your money. She never has. You deeply wounded her pride and her heart. You cannot buy her forgiveness from a distance. You need to force a conversation where she cannot simply walk away, but it must be entirely on her terms." De Hyun leaned forward, his elbows resting on the mahogany wood. "How?" "We lay a trap," Adam said, a faint, clever smile touching his lips. "Miss Dora has been relentlessly applying for high-level administrative positions to support herself. She is fiercely independent now. So, we give her a job." "She will never accept a job at Kang Enterprises," De Hyun countered bitterly. "She checks the subsidiary names. She's smart. Which is why she won't be applying to a Kang company," Adam replied. "I have a contact at a highly prestigious, independent art gallery, a gallery that, purely by coincidence, desperately needs a new estate manager to handle a private, highly secretive VIP client this Friday evening. The pay is astronomical. It's an opportunity she cannot logically turn down." De Hyun's dark eyes narrowed as the plan took shape in his mind. "And the VIP client?" "Will be you, sir," Adam confirmed. "The gallery will be entirely locked down. No exits, no crowds. Just the two of you, a room full of art, and the truth." De Hyun stood up, the first spark of life returning to his chest in weeks. He straightened his tailored suit, his sharp jawline setting with absolute determination. Meanwhile, in her small apartment, Dora's phone chimed with an email notification. She opened it, her charismatic eyes widening at the official crest of the Seoul Grand Gallery. They were offering her a trial position for an exclusive VIP viewing. It was the break she had been praying for. She quickly typed out her acceptance, completely unaware that she had just walked directly into the lion's den. The Seoul Grand Gallery was entirely silent, bathed in the soft, golden glow of the recessed lighting. Dora stood in the center of the main exhibition hall, clutching a clipboard to her chest. She was dressed in a sleek, professional black dress, her incredibly long wavy hair pinned back elegantly. She had been instructed to wait for the VIP client, but the absolute stillness of the locked-down building was beginning to set her on edge. Then, the heavy oak doors at the far end of the gallery clicked shut, and the lock engaged with a definitive thud. Dora spun around. Stepping out of the shadows, looking like a dark prince against the backdrop of priceless art, was Kang De Hyun. Dora's breath hitched, her clipboard slipping from her fingers to clatter against the polished marble floor. He wore a perfectly tailored charcoal suit, his messy black hair framing his sharp, aristocratic jawline. But it wasn't his intimidating presence that froze her in place, it was the look in his dark eyes. The cold billionaire was completely gone. In his place was a man stripped of all his armor, looking at her with a desperate, agonizing hunger. What are you doing here?" Dora whispered, instinctively taking a step back. "This is a closed event. The VIP client." "I am the client, Dora," De Hyun said, his deep voice echoing softly through the cavernous hall. He began to close the distance between them, his strides slow and deliberate. "There is no estate manager position. Adam arranged this. It was the only way I could get you in a room where you couldn't run away from me." "You tricked me?" Dora's eyes flared with defensive anger. "Of course you did. You manipulate everything. Because I am drowning without you." De Hyun shouted, the sudden, raw explosion of emotion startling them both. He stopped just a few feet away from her, his chest heaving. The vulnerability in his face shattered her defenses. "I am a fool, Dora," he confessed, his voice dropping to a trembling whisper as he closed the remaining distance. He reached out, hesitating for a fraction of a second before gently cupping her cheeks. She didn't pull away this time. "I spent 2 years building walls, assuming everyone in the world was a monster like the Damians. I was so consumed by my vengeance that I couldn't see the angel standing right in front of me. Throwing you out was the biggest mistake of my miserable life. My empire, my billions, it's all dust if I don't have you to share it with." Tears welled in Dora's charismatic eyes, spilling over his thumbs. She looked into his soul and saw the profound regret that had been eating him alive. "I love you," De Hyun breathed, leaning his forehead against hers. "I have loved you since the night you stood up to me in that cold bedroom. Please, Dora. Forgive me. Let me spend the rest of my life making it up to you." A sob tore from Dora's throat. She couldn't fight it anymore. The love she had tried to bury rose up like a tidal wave. She threw her arms around his neck, burying her face in his shoulder. De Hyun let out a shaky breath of pure relief, wrapping his strong arms tightly around her waist, lifting her off the ground as if he would never, ever let her go again. Within the month, the shadows of the past were entirely eradicated. Catherine and Arthur Damian were officially charged with attempted murder and corporate sabotage, their faces plastered across national news as they were escorted to a maximum security prison in handcuffs. De Hyun's lawyers decimated the fraudulent marriage certificate with swift, brutal precision. And then, Kang De Hyun gave Dora the wedding she truly deserved. There were no opaque veils or dark secrets. Under a breathtaking canopy of thousands of white orchids, Dora walked down the aisle in a custom, glittering gown that hugged her breathtaking curves. This time, when De Hyun looked at her, his eyes were filled with nothing but absolute devotion. They exchanged vows not as a transaction, but as a promise of forever. The master suite of the Kang estate was bathed in the soft, romantic glow of a dozen flickering candles. The heavy scent of fresh orchids lingered in the warm air. Dora sat at the edge of the plush vanity stool, wearing a sleek, floor-length black silk nightgown that clung perfectly to her silhouette. The thin straps left her shoulders completely bare. She held a silver brush, slowly pulling it through her extremely long, dark wavy hair, letting the heavy, beautiful locks cascade down her bare spine. The bathroom door clicked open, and a cloud of warm steam rolled into the bedroom. De Hyun stepped out, a towel slung low around his waist. Droplets of water tracked down his chiseled chest, highlighting his powerful, muscular frame. He stopped in the center of the room, his dark eyes locking onto the reflection of his wife in the vanity mirror. Seeing Dora like this, bathed in candlelight, her bare skin glowing against the dark silk, her wild hair tumbling down her back, snapped the last thread of De Hyun's legendary restraint. The months of waiting, the agonizing separation, and the skipped wedding night all culminated into a burning, possessive fire. He crossed the room silently. Dora gasped softly as she felt his large, warm hands cup her bare shoulders from behind. He leaned down, burying his face in the crook of her neck, his messy, damp hair brushing against her cheek. "You are devastatingly beautiful," De Hyun murmured against her skin, pressing a hot, searing kiss to the side of her neck that sent a violent jolt of electricity straight to her core. He took the silver brush from her trembling hand and set it on the vanity. Slowly, he tangled his fingers into her thick, wavy hair, tilting her head back to capture her lips in a deep, desperate kiss. Dora melted against him, her hands reaching up to trace his sharp jawline. With a low groan, De Hyun swept her effortlessly into his arms. He carried her to the massive bed, laying her gently against the mountain of white pillows. He followed her down, hovering over her, his eyes burning with a dark, heavy passion. He took absolute charge, kissing every inch of her face, her jaw, and her collarbones, worshipping the woman who had saved him from his own darkness. Dora tangled her fingers in his damp hair, pulling him closer as the sleek silk nightgown slipped effortlessly away. They moved together slowly, desperately, entirely consumed by the gravity of their love. De Hyun's every touch was a promise, melting Dora completely into the tangled bedsheets as the storm of their passion finally broke, leaving nothing but intense, breathless bliss in its wake. Hours later, the storm settled. They lay tangled together under the covers, completely exhausted and utterly satisfied, Dora's head resting over his steady heartbeat. When the morning sun peeked through the heavy curtains, Dora fluttered her eyes open. De Hyun was already awake, propped up on one elbow, tracing gentle circles on her bare shoulder with a soft smile on his handsome face. "Good morning, wifey," he whispered, his raspy morning voice sending a familiar, wonderful shiver down her spine. Dora smiled, a radiant, happy glow lighting up her charismatic features. She reached up, brushing a stray lock of black hair from his forehead. "Good morning, husband. Are you going to stare at me all day, or are you going to run your empire?" De Hyun chuckled, leaning down to press a soft, lingering kiss to her lips. "Let the empire wait," he murmured against her mouth, pulling the blankets back over them. "My entire world is right here in this bed."